The hospital lights were blinding that night, sharp and white like judgment itself. My granddaughter stood frozen at the operating table, her gloved hands trembling over the chest of the woman who had once left her to starve. The machines beeped, steady and cruel, reminding us that mercy has a heartbeat. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Sometimes life forces us to face the very people who broke us. I stood there, clutching the locket my son once gave me, praying that forgiveness wouldn't destroy what survival had built. That was the night everything came full circle. Let me show you how it all began. It was past midnight when the call came in. I remember the sound of the phone cutting through the quiet of the house, the kind of silence that only exists in old homes and sleepless hearts. My granddaughter, Lily, was at the hospital. Again, only this time, the patient she was fighting to save was her own mother. I still can't quite explain what it feels like to see the past come rushing back under those bright, sterile hospital lights. Lily, standing there in her scrubs, her face calm and focused, while on that table lay the woman who had once left her behind. The machines beeped steadily, the air thick with antiseptic and memory. The nurses whispered as if the walls themselves remembered what had happened in our family. And I, an old woman, stood on the other side of the glass, praying, trembling, and wondering if this was mercy or punishment. They say life has a cruel way of coming full circle. Watching Lily that night, saving the same woman who had caused her so much pain, I realized how far we had all come and how much it had cost us. That night was not the beginning of our story. No, it started years earlier, in a small town tucked into the Oregon Valley, where my son Michael lived with his wife, Melissa, and their little girl. Michael was the kind of man who brought light into every room. Even as a boy, he had that quiet kindness that made people believe the world could be gentle. When he fell ill, the world seemed to darken one piece at a time. Cancer, they said, like a thief that moves in silence. I watched the strength drain from him, day by day. And though Melissa tried to hold herself together, something inside her cracked long before the funeral. After Michael was gone, she changed. The house filled with noise, the clinking of bottles, the shouting, the nights when little Lily hid in the hallway, clutching her teddy bear. I tried to step in, but grief has a way of turning love into anger. Melissa pushed us all away, and I could only watch as my son's family unraveled, thread by thread. That night in the hospital, as I watched my granddaughter fight for the life of the woman who'd once abandoned her, I knew one thing for certain. Our story wasn't just about loss. It was about what we do with the pieces left behind. And as the monitors beeped and time slowed, I could feel it beginning again. The long, painful reckoning that would follow. After the funeral, the house went silent in a way that didn't feel natural. It wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that presses down on you, like the air itself is grieving. Melissa stopped coming by the cemetery after the first week. She said it hurt too much, but I knew it wasn't pain she was avoiding. It was guilt, and the weight of a life that had fallen apart too soon. I tried to help her. I'd drop off meals, offer to take Lily for the weekend, just to give her some rest. But rest was never what she wanted. She began spending her nights out, coming home with that hollow stare people wear when they've stopped trying to remember who they were. Bottles replaced dinners. Anger replaced grief. And little by little, the mother I once knew disappeared. There were nights when the phone would ring after midnight, and I'd hear Lily's soft cries through the static. She didn't have the words to describe it, but I could hear it in her voice. The loneliness, the fear. I remember one night, driving over in my robe, the rain coming down so hard the wipers could barely keep up. Melissa opened the door, her eyes glassy, slurring about how I always thought I was better than her. Behind her, Lily stood barefoot in her pajamas, trembling. I still see that image in my mind. The child who had already learned that home wasn't always safe. And then, one morning, they were gone. No warning, no goodbye. The house stood empty, dishes still in the sink, mail piled up on the counter. I called everyone I could. Friends, shelters, the police. Each day bled into the next, a blur of waiting rooms and phone calls. People told me to stay patient, that these things take time. But how do you stay patient when a child's life depends on it? It was almost a week later when I found her. I'll never forget the cold bite of that morning air or the sound of traffic humming behind the Walmart. There, near the dumpsters, was Lily, curled up in a blanket that wasn't hers. Her small face streaked with dirt. She looked up at me, not with surprise, but with the kind of quiet acceptance no child should ever know. I wrapped her in my coat, and she clung to me without a word. I wanted to cry, to scream, to ask why this world could be so cruel. But all I could do was hold her and whisper that she was safe now, though part of me knew that safety was still a long way off. That day, I promised myself I would never lose her again. But as I carried her to the car, I couldn't shake the guilt, because in saving her, I also saw how badly we had all failed her. When I brought Lily home that night, she weighed almost nothing in my arms. Her body was so small, so fragile, as if the world had been too heavy for her to carry. I remember the quiet creak of the front door, the soft glow from the kitchen lamp, and the way the warmth of the house seemed to breathe around us, like it was waiting to welcome her back. I ran a warm bath, the scent of lavender rising through the steam, and as I washed the dirt from her hands, I felt the ache of every night she had spent alone. That first week was a blur of small, careful things: soup simmering on the stove, clean pajamas folded on the bed, the soft hum of the washing machine late into the night. Lily barely spoke. She would sit by the window, tracing the fog on the glass, eyes far away. I didn't ask questions. I just stayed close, humming the same lullabies I once sang to her father. Slowly, she began to sleep through the night. The first time she laughed, it startled me. It was small, fleeting, but it was there. Then came the knock on the door. 2 people from social services. Their words were polite but sharp in their certainty. I wasn't Lily's legal guardian. They said there were procedures, evaluations, timelines. They warned me that the state might place her somewhere better suited. I smiled and nodded as they spoke, but inside, I was shaking. How could a stranger decide what was best for a child they'd never held that night, after they left? I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of papers, birth certificates, school forms, court letters I didn't fully understand. I made calls, filled out documents, and prayed for strength. I picked up extra shifts at the library, saved every dollar, and met with a lawyer who agreed to help me file for custody. It wasn't easy. Some days, the weight of it all felt unbearable. But every time I looked at Lily, her small hands coloring at the table, the way she flinched less each day, I knew quitting wasn't an option. As the months passed, something inside her began to bloom. She started therapy, and little by little, the walls she had built began to crack open. One afternoon, I found her in the backyard, bandaging the leg of a stuffed bear. She looked up and told me she wanted to be a doctor, so no one would ever feel as helpless as she once did. I turned away before she could see the tears. It was the first time I'd seen true light in her eyes since Michael died. We were far from healed, but we had built something solid, safety, warmth, a fragile kind of joy that came from surviving together. Sometimes, when the sun dipped low and the light fell across her face just right, I saw Michael there, the same kindness, the same determination, and in those moments, I knew this wasn't just rebuilding. It was resurrection, hope, reborn in the smallest hands I'd ever held. It was late, close to midnight, when the knock came. 3 sharp raps against the door, too steady to be the wind, too deliberate to be a stranger. I remember freezing where I stood, my hands still wet from washing the dinner dishes. For a moment, I told myself it couldn't be her. It had been years. Melissa was gone. She had vanished like a bad dream. But when I opened the door, there she was, leaner, older, eyes a little too bright. She smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes, and said she'd come to make things right. My stomach turned. Every sound in the house seemed louder, the clock ticking, the refrigerator humming, Lily's soft footsteps upstairs. I stood between Melissa and that staircase like a shield. I didn't need to raise my voice. My silence was enough. She left that night, but her shadow stayed. The next morning, Lily wouldn't eat. Her hands shook when she held her spoon. She asked if her mom was coming back, and I could see the fear buried behind her words, the old memories clawing their way out. That night, she woke screaming, drenched in sweat, calling out for her father. I sat beside her until sunrise, tracing circles on her back, whispering that she was safe. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure anymore. Days later, Melissa began showing up around town. People said she seemed different, sober, polite, talking about finding God and wanting a second chance. She told anyone who would listen that she missed her daughter. Some neighbors started to believe her. Even the principal at Lily's school called, saying Melissa had come by, asking to see her. That was when I knew this wasn't repentance. It was manipulation. The old patterns wrapped in new words. I called my lawyer that afternoon. We began preparing for what felt inevitable. The custody papers, the court summons, the endless questions. I could feel the walls closing in again, that same helplessness from years ago pressing down on me. Every evening, I'd double-check the locks, peek through the blinds, watch headlights pass by too slowly. The phone would ring, and my heart would jump. Each envelope in the mailbox felt heavier than the last. The peace we had built, so fragile, so hard-won, was cracking under the weight of what was coming. Lily tried to be brave. She still went to school, still practiced her drawings at the kitchen table, but her laughter had changed. It came out softer now, uncertain. I caught her once staring at the front door for a long time, her eyes wide and distant. That night, as I tucked her in, I realized we were standing at the edge of another storm, and though every part of me wanted to crumble under the fear, I knew I couldn't. Not this time. I promised myself that whatever was coming, no matter how ugly or unfair, I would fight for her. Still, as the days counted down to that first court date, I couldn't shake the dread that the world was about to test just how much love could endure. The morning of the hearing felt colder than it should have been. Even the sun seemed hesitant to rise. I remember the sound of my shoes echoing across the courthouse hallway, every step heavier than the last. I had barely slept for days, my mind circling the same question over and over. What if they take her away? What if all of this, every fight, every sleepless night, ends with me walking out of that building alone when I entered the courtroom? It struck me how sterile it all felt. The walls were a pale shade of gray. The air faintly smelled of coffee and paper. People moved with quiet purpose, their voices hushed, their faces unreadable. To them, this was just another case. But to me, it was my entire life. Melissa arrived late. She looked different. Her hair neatly done, a new dress, her posture carefully practiced. To anyone else, she might have looked reformed, but I saw the tremor in her hands, the way her smile flickered too quickly. She was performing, as she always had, playing the part of the repentant mother. When the proceedings began, her lawyer spoke first. Words like second chance, rehabilitation, and maternal rights filled the room. Each one felt like a small knife. I sat still, my hands clasped tightly together, willing myself not to cry. My lawyer spoke next, calmly, plainly, laying out the years of neglect, the nights Lily spent hungry, the bruises of a life no child should have known. I listened, but I didn't need to hear the details. I had lived them. The social worker took the stand next. She spoke of Lily's progress, how she was thriving in my care, how she smiled more now, how she slept through the night. Her voice quivered slightly when she said those words, and I could see Melissa's face harden. Then came the moment that broke me open. They called Lily to speak. She was so small behind that stand, her legs barely touching the floor. Her voice trembled, but she spoke the truth that no adult could twist. She said she felt safe with me, that she wanted to stay, that I made her feel like she belonged. The silence that followed felt eternal. Melissa's eyes filled with tears, but not the kind that come from love. They came from losing control. Her voice rose, sharp and frantic, blaming everyone but herself. The judge tried to calm her, but her outburst had already shattered the illusion. In that instant, the truth was undeniable. When the gavel finally fell, I felt my breath return for the first time in months. The judge's words blurred in my mind. All I heard was the sound of Lily's small hand slipping into mine. I had won, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. As we stepped outside, the light was softer, warmer. Melissa stood across the street, motionless, her expression unreadable. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. Somewhere inside, I still saw the woman my son had loved, but that chapter was gone. Holding Lily close, I realized justice doesn't heal. It only clears the way for healing to begin. And as we walked away from that courthouse, I knew our story wasn't over. It was only changing shape, moving from battle toward something quieter, something like peace. Years have a way of softening everything. The edges of pain, the sound of old grief, even the weight of memories that once felt too heavy to carry. After the custody case ended, our days began to stretch wide and gentle again. There was no more fear of letters, no late-night knocks, no lawyers or judges, only the slow, quiet rhythm of living. Lily grew fast, as if the years of stillness in her childhood had been waiting to catch up all at once. I would wake up early some mornings to find her at the kitchen table, her textbooks spread out beside a half-eaten bowl of cereal. Her eyes, so much like her father's, were focused, determined. She volunteered at the local clinic on weekends, and I often watched her leave the house with that same small bag he used to carry when he was a resident. I saw him in her every day, not in the way she looked, but in the way she cared. There were moments that tested us. Of course, the past doesn't vanish. It lingers, whispering through quiet nights or sudden memories. But Lily never let her pain turn her bitter. Instead, she used it as fuel. She worked harder, loved deeper, and gave more than I ever thought a person could. When she talked about becoming a doctor, I could hear the conviction in her voice. She didn't just want to heal bodies. She wanted to heal hearts, too. The day she received her acceptance letter to medical school, I cried before she even opened it. I had prayed for that moment, not for me, but for her, for all the years she'd lost, for every moment of fear she had endured. Watching her read that letter, her hands trembling, her face lit with pure disbelief, I felt the universe shift a little. It was as if every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every courtroom tear had been leading here. As the years went on, I began to slow down. My joints ached, my steps shortened, but my heart felt lighter than ever. I would sit by the window in the evenings, watching the light fall across the photographs on the mantel. Michael's graduation, Lily's first day of high school, the three of us at the county fair. There was peace there, in those faces frozen in time. When Lily graduated from medical school, she wore her father's old watch on her wrist. It was worn and scratched, but she said it made her feel closer to him. That morning, as she stood in her white coat, smiling in the sunlight, I felt something deeper than pride. It was completion. A circle closed, my son's heart still beating through his daughter's hands. Sometimes, when the house is quiet, I can almost hear Michael's voice again, gentle and sure, telling me that we did it, that she's going to be all right. And I believe him. But life, I've learned, never stops teaching. Even in peace, there's always one more lesson waiting. And as I looked out at the horizon that evening, I could feel it, the faint stirring of something unexpected, something that would once again test the strength of the love we'd built. Time has a way of folding in on itself. Some mornings I wake and forget what year it is. The house feels too quiet, though it's filled with photographs and laughter etched into every corner. Lily's a doctor now, a surgeon, just like her father once dreamed of being. Watching her step into that white coat, Steady hands and clear eyes has been my greatest comfort in these twilight years. I've often thought if my life ended tomorrow, I would go in peace. But peace, it seems, always comes with one final test. It happened on a gray afternoon in late autumn. I was sitting by the window, reading, when my phone rang. Lily's voice sounded different, soft, careful. She said there was a patient, an emergency admission, a woman, mid-50s, brought in unconscious. No identification at first, but when Lily saw her face, she froze. It was Melissa. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That name had been a ghost in this house for decades. Part of me had long buried her in the past, where I thought she belonged. But now she was back, broken, sick, and in Lily's care. Life, it seemed, had written a circle so perfect it almost felt cruel. When I arrived at the hospital, I stood in the hallway outside the trauma room, my hands shaking. Through the glass, I saw Lily, focused, calm, her gloved hands working with quiet precision. I could barely recognize Melissa. The years had carved deep lines into her face, her hair streaked with gray. She looked nothing like the fierce woman who once tore our lives apart. She looked human again, fragile, defeated. And yet, as I watched Lily save her, I felt the war inside me. Part of me wanted to turn away, to hold on to the anger that had once kept me alive. But another part, the softer part I'd tried so hard to silence, began to ache for her. No one deserves to die alone. Hours later, when the monitors quieted and the nurses stepped back, Melissa opened her eyes for a moment. Lily was standing beside her, silent, steady. Melissa's lips moved faintly, her eyes filled with something that looked like regret, or maybe recognition. And then, before anyone could speak, she was gone. I sat there long after, my heart heavy but strangely still. Lily turned to me, her eyes red but peaceful. She had done what I couldn't. She had chosen compassion over resentment. In that moment, I saw what true strength looked like. It wasn't in winning battles or holding grudges. It was in forgiving, even when no one asks for it. As we walked out of that hospital, the air was crisp, the sky streaked with fading gold. I thought back to the little girl I'd found behind a Walmart so many years ago, cold, afraid, and lost. And now, here she was, a woman who could save the life of the one who had once abandoned her. It struck me then. This was the full circle. The story that began in pain had found its ending in grace. And for the first time in my long life, I truly understood forgiveness doesn't change the past. It heals the heart that carries it. The light in the evenings has changed. It comes softer now, spilling across the curtains like a tender memory that refuses to fade. I sit here most nights, in the same chair by the window, watching the sun settle behind the trees. The house is quiet, but not empty. It's full of echoes, laughter, footsteps, whispered prayers, and the rhythm of a life that has finally come to rest. When I look back now, the years feel less like a straight path and more like a winding river, slow, unpredictable, and endlessly patient. We began in loss. I remember that pain so vividly, it still takes my breath sometimes. My son gone too soon. My granddaughter, small and broken, trying to survive the chaos her mother left behind. I carried so much anger then, anger at fate, at Melissa, even at God for a time. But life, I've learned, doesn't end in bitterness. It circles back, again and again, offering you chances to choose love, even when it hurts. Watching Lily grow into the woman she is now has been my redemption. She carries the best of both her parents, the strength of her father, the compassion her mother could never show in life, but somehow passed on through pain. I've seen her stand in the same halls her father once walked, saving lives with hands that have known suffering. And in that, I see the miracle of grace, how something broken can still give life to something whole. I used to think forgiveness was a gift you gave to someone else. Now I understand it's something you give yourself. Holding on to anger was like carrying a stone in my chest. The day I let it go, I could breathe again. Maybe that's what heaven really is. Peace that comes when you've stopped needing to win. Sometimes, when the evening light hits just right, I imagine Michael and Melissa standing side by side, watching over us, not as ghosts of the past, but as quiet witnesses to how love endured despite everything. Through Lily, their stories found each other again, and mine found its ending. If there's one thing I've learned in all my years, it's this: love is stronger than pain, forgiveness deeper than justice, and family larger than blood. We don't choose how our stories begin, but we can choose how they end, with mercy, with understanding, with peace. So, if you've ever carried a hurt that feels too heavy to let go, maybe this is your sign to try. You might find that forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It simply frees your heart to live again. Have you ever had to forgive someone who hurt you? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone.